This teenager recorded himself after him and his two friends stabbed their father to death in his own home with a 2-foot machete as his child was sleeping upstairs and his girlfriend watched frozen in fear. This story takes place in Basingstoke, a quiet town in the southern part of England. However, news will break out when 31-year-old Frantisek Olah is murdered inside his own home with his family upstairs. But before I get into what happened, let's quickly look at who exactly was Frantisek Olah. Frantisek, 31 years old, father of two, was described as a kind and loving family man. News reports from the time described shocked relatives and friends who were struggling to make sense of why anyone would want to attack him. But beneath the surface, Frantisek was heavily involved in the criminal drug life and was described as a Basingstoke drug dealer. Frantisek's involvement in the drug business would get him into a sticky situation, where it's alleged that he got into drug disputes that got heated. This would eventually escalate, and without knowing, Frantisek put a target on his own back. These disputes would lead to him taking his last breath in front of his own family. On Sunday 22nd of May 2022, three teenagers, Jadane Carty, Ismaila Kamarra-Jarra and Cohen Daly, hatched up a plan to go and rob Frantisek, after it said that Jadane Carty received some insults from Frantisek over text. The three teenagers made their way to his home address in Musgrave Close at 11:14 p.m. This is when they barged their way in through the front door. Ismaila Kamarra-Jarra was seen carrying a machete said to be around 2 feet in length. This would be the same weapon that they used to stab Frantisek 20 times in the head and chest once they broke into his house. After the stabbing, the teenagers ransacked the kitchen, opening cupboards, shouting, "Give me the car keys," before running out the house whilst Frantisek bled on the floor. The attack was quick and only lasted a couple of minutes, but all of this happened whilst Frantisek's child was asleep upstairs and his girlfriend watched, frozen in fear. The three teenagers were heard by neighbours laughing whilst they ran out of the house with a machete covered in blood. The police were called and arrived to find Frantisek laying on the floor covered in a pool of his own blood. The child upstairs had slept through the whole attack but was woken up by the mother, who feared for her child's safety. The family would watch as Frantisek was rushed to the hospital, but by the early hours of Monday, the 23rd of May, doctors confirmed the worst. The injuries were too severe and Frantisek Olah died at just the age of 31. The police will now launch an investigation into the murder of Frantisek Olah. They will go through hours of CCTV footage and mobile phone data. Forensic investigators recovered DNA, blood traces and clothing fibres from inside the property. A neighbour also reported seeing one of the group drop something metallic as they ran, later suspected to be part of the weapon. Once the police went through Frantisek's phone, they found a heated text exchange between him and Jadane Carty on the day of his death. Jadane was arrested within 48 hours of the murder and was found to have some injuries to his hand, consistent with someone wielding a knife during a struggle. Mobile phone data placed Cohen Daly in the Musgrave Close area at the exact time of the killing. He was arrested at an address in Reading a few days later. As for Ismaila Kamarra-Jarra, he left Basingstoke shortly after the killing, but detectives tracked him down using bank cards and phone activity. He was arrested in London within a week of the attack by the Metropolitan Police. All three teenagers denied involvement in the killing, so all that was left now was for them to stand trial. The case was heard in the Winchester Crown Court, and the prosecution's case relied on several pillars of evidence, from CCTV, mobile phone footage, witness testimonies, and the defendant's own behaviour after the attack. You see, after the three teenagers killed Frantisek, Ismaila Kamarra-Jarra recorded himself walking and carrying a large knife. In the phone recording, you can see him pointing the camera to himself, before showing off the machete. The prosecution presented this to the jury, along with several other images of him with a knife. Investigators tracked the group's movement around the time of the murder. The court heard evidence that the men travelled together, attended the address, and then left within minutes of the attack. However, this is when 3 other names will also come into the mix, this being Keisha Saunders, Kelsey Byrne, and Abby Mills. These 3 18-year-old teenage girls were the girlfriends of the suspects. They were accused of assisting the offender after the attack. Kelsey Byrne allegedly helped them flee the scene and hid evidence. Various CCTV footage shown in court appears to show the cars of Kelsey and Keisha driving to and from various locations with the attackers. The court heard that the speed and aggression of the attack meant that the 3 girls knew what was going to happen and the part they were going to play. In one of the evidence presented by the prosecution, Abby Mills and the defendant took a taxi, and the taxi driver heard Abby, in response to the corner of crime scene, say, "I'm actually scared now," before being told to shut up because they were in a taxi. Keisha Saunders was also charged with assisting an offender because the prosecution argued that her and Kelsey were together waiting to be called to assist the men and drive them around. After the attack, there were a series of calls between the men and the 3 young women. The prosecution were really gunning to get all 6 suspects charged in some way for the murder. The evidence will now switch back to the 3 teenage attackers, as the court heard they were laughing and making jokes after the attack. They would even start writing and recording rap lyrics that described the murder in detail, further incriminating themselves. The defense team for the teenagers argued that there were doubts on who inflicted the fatal wounds and the murder wasn't premeditated, because the reason they were at the home in the first place was to rob Frantisek, and they attacked him out of self-defense. The nail on the coffin would come once the partner Chelsea Lee, who witnessed the attack, gave her statement for the prosecution to read out. The statement read, "Chelsea was sitting watching something on the TV before there was a bang on the door. As her partner went to the door, she heard an even louder bang and heard him shouting in pain. She came through the hallway and saw him lying on the floor with one of the men already inside the house and 2 right behind. Jadane Carty was the first one in, and he was carrying a Rambo knife. Jadane was stabbing in the upper part of his body, and Mr. Kamarra-Jarra, he too was stabbing, and then the third. They were all stabbing repeatedly at speed. She thinks they stabbed him about 20 times before she shouted at Jadane, who came towards her. Miss Lee ran into the garden to get help from a neighbour, shouting, "There's people in my house with knives." The 3 teenagers ran down the road, having used the back entrance and gone through the couple's garden. Miss Lee went back into the house to fetch a young child, and Mr. Olah was lying in so much of his own blood it was hard to approach. All the different sides were heard, and the defendants gave the court everything they needed by recording themselves and making drill songs talking about the murder. The jurors didn't need a lot of time to come to a decision, as the facts and evidence presented on the 3 teenagers was strong and convincing. On the 26th of January 2023, the jury found Jadane Carty, Ismaila Kamarra-Jarra, and Cohen Daly guilty of murder. Sentencing took place in February, and the judge handed down heavy minimum terms reflecting the severity of the crime and the defendants' ages. All 3 teenagers received a life sentence, with Ismaila, who was 19 years old at the time, receiving a minimum of 32 years, whilst Jadane and Cohen, 18 years old, received a minimum of 29 years behind bars. In relation to the 3 teenage girls that assisted the offenders, I can't really find too much information on their case, but from an article I've read online, it seems that the jury found these women not guilty because the prosecution could not prove their involvement beyond reasonable doubt. It's safe to say that these criminals were not the sharpest tool in the shed, but when I look back at this case, I remember that these kids are only 18 years old and threw away their life over something so avoidable. The fact that they felt the need to kill this man over a drug dispute is just something I can't understand. They stabbed the man 20 times in front of their partner and whilst the child was sleeping upstairs, and then they were laughing and smiling like it's a joke. To really show you why this whole thing is mad, by the time these 18-year-olds get out of prison, they'll be close to 50 years old, and that's when they'll realise they've wasted their whole life. There's still a lot of question marks around this case, but I don't know if we'd ever get an answer to exactly why these teenagers killed Frantisek Olah.